So we're back in the shop. The last episode we put out, we were doing an annealing process for the Farrier's Rasp build, getting the handle annealed so that we could drill the holes in the handle. And since then, the only other thing that I've done is I have tempered the knife in the oven. I did 2 cycles of 2 hours long at 400 degrees. And this is kind of where we're at with it so far. So you can see it's got that really nice straw color on it that comes after the temper. And that's a pretty good indication that the temper went well, I think. Typically kind of see that brownish color. But anyway, yeah, this was an already hardened Farrier's Rasp, and with a little bit of research that I did, anywhere from 63 to 65 HRC, and tempering it at 400 degrees for 2 2-hour cycles should bring it down to somewhere around 60, maybe 59, 60. So that's a really good number, I think, for a big chopper like this. I think that's going to be pretty solid. So anyway, we got it tempered and got the holes punched through. So now we're pretty much to the point where we're going to need to put on the handles. I've been thinking about what material to use. I'll bring you over to the wall here. I've got a little bit of a selection at the moment, not a ton, of course, but I do have some epoxy resin scales here that I made, and those are pretty cool. Got some black palm scales. These actually, I thought about doing these, but I'm thinking these are going to be better served as like an accent piece. So not an entire scale, but like a piece of a scale. I'll probably save that for that. Just some more like ironwood, Paduke, some acrylic material, some really thick G10, just some black G10, and a couple of blocks. Anyway, I think I decided I'm going to go ahead and use this blue maple burl block. I originally kind of thought, you know what, I'm going to save that for like the next Hidden Tang knife that I make. But I haven't made one of those in a while and thought, you know, this might actually be pretty cool looking on our Farrier's Rasp knife. So, yeah. Anyway, so I think what we're going to do is I'm going to get the bandsaw set up and try to split this in half, and then that way we'll have scales for each side of this. It's a really pretty block, and I think just this, honestly, just this on its own is going to look pretty cool. I'm probably going to put some sort of a liner in between this and the knife, but we'll see when we get there. So anyway, let me get the bandsaw table set up, and then we'll get to cutting. So depending upon what kind of portaband saw you have, or maybe you're lucky and you have an actual tabletop bandsaw, but if you don't, you can use a portaband saw. Most of them have a little plate that sits up on here. Actually goes the other way, but helps you kind of hold on to whatever you're trying to cut through. But you can take these off, and then basically what I've done here is just made a little table out of just some spare wood and cut a slot in the back here, and then drilled a couple of holes and used a countersink to get them down flush with the top of the table. And basically we can now turn this into a tabletop bandsaw. Something like this once I get it hooked up, and then that way it makes it a lot easier when you're doing stuff like this. You can line it up and, you know, make sure that you're going even. It's really good for cutting metal, for wood, but this is a really cool way to turn this saw into something more usable, especially for knife making. But yeah, anyway, they sell these lots of places, Harbor Freight, online. You can buy like, you know, nice metal versions of this for a couple $100. This was free, you know, just some spare wood that I had laying around. So I would suggest doing that. Save your $200 and, you know, put that or invest that into some other equipment that you can't make for knife making. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of show that it's fairly easy to set up and it's super handy. All right, so now that we have our one block split down the middle, we now have a set of book matched scales. And that's a really cool way to basically have two identical pieces for either side of the knife. Whenever you split a block down the middle, you'll notice that a lot of the patterns mimic each other because they're cut right down the center. I know that's common sense, but yeah, anyway, that's pretty cool. So now what we're gonna do, and what I like to do, is make sure that we have both sets of the scales flat. They appear flat, and on the side that came finished, they seem flat, but they're not. You can tell there's a bit of a wonkiness to them. So I feel like that's a really important step, to take the time to get the side that you're going to be putting the knife up against to get it completely flat. That way you don't have any areas where it's not touching either the spacer or the knife itself. With the limited amount of tools that I have, I really have two options to get these flat, and both involve this 4x36 belt grinder. So there it is there. Basically have the option of using the belt and just holding it up here. This particular belt grinder luckily also has a just a disc sander on the side, and this I feel like is a really solid way, because we know that the disc behind it is machined flat, whereas this, even though it is flat, you know, it's not, there's a lot more to it. There's the belt and the inconsistencies in the belt. There's also kind of low spots where I've used this before, so I really feel like this is going to be the best bet, and if you have one of these, I would recommend using that. So really all we're going to try to do is take the side that we cut, and we're going to hold it up against this and let it run and flatten it out. So looking at this, you can see parts that are getting hit by the abrasive, and then the parts that are the low parts where the bandsaw was at. So really it looks flat still, but there's very fine micro dips in the level there. So we're just basically going to continue this process of going from the disc sander back to the belt and back and forth until we get all those cut marks out of here. And the entire thing should end up looking nice and polished and smoothed out, like these sections here. So we're going to continue to do that until we get to that point. So you can make pretty short work of this, especially with a fresh belt. I'm just using 120 grit aluminum oxide belt, just the cheap ones. And I feel like those are meant more for wood anyway. But there you go. So now we have a completely true flat scale, and we'll be able to mate this up to the tang of the knife pretty well now, and know that it'll be sitting relatively flat up against the liner or the knife. So anyway, there's one done. Now we basically just have this other one to run through, and then we'll be good. All right, so now that we're to this point where we have our block cut in half, and we took the time to smooth and flatten both of these out, we're now sitting pretty good. You can see here, this is the way the one side was when it came. Definitely not super flat, and that's why when we cut it in half, we decided to go ahead and flatten it out so that it sits good. I did make a knife, one of my probably second or third one that I ever made, and I skipped that step, and you can tell there's a bit of a gap in between the knife and the handle. So it's pretty important not to just look past that and assume that they are flat, because most of the times they're not. So anyway, now that we have that established, I was thinking probably what I'll do is use a combination of liners. So I was kind of going back and forth between white and black. I actually have a white G10 spacer, vulcanized paper that's black, and then another extremely thin version of the vulcanized paper that's white. So I was thinking if I stack these up, be kind of hard to see to get them to line up right, but you can kind of sort of get the idea. Kind of white, black, a very thin white, and then this. And I was thinking, you know, that'd probably be pretty cool. I have not done this before, where I have done 3 separate liners on each side. So I thought, you know what, let's try something new and different and see if it turns out cool. You know, the only way I'm ever gonna know if it looks cool is if I just do it. You can kind of try to get an idea, although because these materials are different thicknesses, it's kind of hard to get them all lined up to where you can imagine it, but that's the best I got there. But yeah, anyway, you'll have a nice, good, solid white line up against this. And then I think doing the little thin white vulcanized paper will really help to basically get the black to pop out really good. It's kind of hard to see. But yeah, you'll get a nice thin black line in there, and I think that that will be pretty cool. So I'm excited to do this. I think there's a couple ways to do this. I think what I'm gonna do first is probably glue the liners to the block. And since I've got 4 layers here that I'm gluing, we'll do that step first, and then we'll have 2 solid scales. We'll be able to come through and trim the excess off, and basically just get it back to being somewhat square. And then once I hit that point where we've got those 2 scales basically complete and ready, I will then go back and throw the knife onto them and kind of trace a line around where it's at and cut it out on the bandsaw. And that step will be good because it'll save us a lot of grinding and a lot of dust in the shop, because as you can see, there is quite a bit of material that we don't need here. Plus, if I cut it out right, I can potentially save this chunk. It's really pretty wood, and I hate to you know, waste a good bit of it, but we're gonna have to. So hopefully I'll be able to cut it out to where I can use this on a future project. All right, so now that we know what other handle material we're adding to the scales, we've decided to do like a thin piece of white G10, and then a black piece of vulcanized paper, and then finally a thin piece of white vulcanized paper. And we're going to want to glue all of these up before we try to get the profile of the handle on here and cut out. It's just, I find that doing it this way is a little bit easier if you start with this. And then you can also go in and you can trim up any excess that you have sticking out. You can lay the knife handle on here and trace the profile out so that you're not spending so much time grinding. Another thing too, it depends on what material you're using. I have found with this white G10, it really helps to drill small little holes or somehow create scratches in the surface for the epoxy to kind of fall into and sit into. I've done it where it's just smooth and I've been successful, but I've also had one knife that I did where I didn't really prep these at all. I cleaned them, but I didn't scratch them up or anything. And during the part where I was, after I traced it and I was using the bandsaw to cut the excess off, this spacer actually came off. I don't really think that it got too hot or anything from the bandsaw. I think that there just wasn't a super great layer in between them. So I think I've had better success just drilling really small holes about halfway through, and that creates just kind of a little pocket for the epoxy to sit into and grip onto both sides of where you're gluing. So to do that, we're basically just going to do one side, and that'll help keep it attached to the vulcanized paper. And then the other side, of course, is going to be up against this knife. And I guess depending upon what your handle looks like, if it's smooth or not, you could do it to both sides. This one I won't have to. It's got a lot of pockets from the rasp, as well as the file side, so it's got places for that epoxy to get into and sit, except for the back part here. Now, if you look at this from the side, it's probably hard to pick up on camera, but you've got all the file ridges up here, and then this smooth part that actually sits lower than the ridges. So this, you know, it potentially could be a problem for your glue up. But what we're gonna do to get around that is add enough epoxy to fill in all these crevices here, or the valleys in the file part. And then we'll probably drill some holes in the liner, as well as maybe a couple in here, wouldn't hurt, just to have an extra place for that epoxy to sit and basically just hug everything tight. So The only drilling that we're really going to need to do is to one side of our G10. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm just using, this looks like maybe a 1/4 inch drill bit. I'm not sure if the size matters so much. We're just trying to create little holes in here for the epoxy to sit into. That'll kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. I haven't gone all the way through on any of these, mainly just trying to create a little divot. And I'm gonna do probably 2 or 3 times this amount just to, you know, make sure that there's enough spots. You're gonna wanna go all along the edge, and you know, you don't have to do this. It's kind of like that one extra step you can do to set yourself up for success. There's no point in putting in time and effort into knife making if you're not going to take every step you can to be successful, if that makes sense. You know, first couple of knives that I built, I feel like number one, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was kind of winging it, but I also kind of rushed through some of the processes that I shouldn't have. So each time you do a knife, you learn something, and you get a little bit better at thinking processes through. And that's really what this is all about, is how to set yourself up to basically be successful and make a good quality knife. Yeah, so anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and continue to drill both of these, and then once that's done, we'll pretty much be ready to glue them up. And I'll probably do like a quick time lapse of that, and yeah, then we'll be done with this step. All right, so now that we have the holes drilled into the G10, we're going to go ahead and mix up some, just use JB Weld clear setting 5-minute epoxy, just because it's readily available and it's pretty cheap. And it works good. I think I haven't used any other types of epoxy in making knives. I've only used this, but works pretty well. So we're going to go ahead and do a pretty liberal amount here. Make sure we have enough. And then we're going to mix it up thoroughly. I really feel like this step is also pretty crucial. You know, you want it to be really mixed well. That way you know that it's good, basically. So definitely take your time on this step. You can kind of go back and forth and really just make sure that it's mixed up well. So yeah, there you have it. Basically got everything glued up together, and using 3 clamps here on each one just to try to apply even pressure. And I think for the most part turned out pretty good. I think all the layers are pretty well nice and even. And yeah, now I'll just let it dry like this for a little bit, and then we'll be ready for taking them off and cleaning them up, and then prepping it for the next step, which will be basically outlining the knife on the scales and getting them ready to not only cut out, but then also kind of pre-form or shape a little bit so that we don't have a ton of grinding to do once we put them onto the knife. So anyway, that's that step. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I tried to explain the best I could. Hopefully it's helpful. And we'll see you on the next part, which will be taking them off and cleaning them up and cutting them out. So thanks.